November 1520. In Stortorget in the Swedish capital of Stockholm, a crowd is formed. Armed guards block the gates to the entrance of the city. The inhabitants of the city have been assembled by force. The newly crowned Swedish king, Kristin II of Denmark, stares from a window in the castle Tre Kronor. An executioner awaits next to a block. King's men stand poised around the executioner to relieve the dead of their jewelry and valuables. The procession of the condemned is led to a square in eerie silence. The crowd is shocked to see their members of the Swedish aristocracy and clergy, people that the commoners previously considered untouchable. Bishop Matthias is led to the block first. "What's new, executioner?" the bishop asks. "Nothing good is new, your grace. I've been ordered to behead you. I beg your grace's pardon." And with that, the first of a series of executions take place. But Bishop Matthias wouldn't be alone. Over the next 3 days, almost 100 people would join him to the shocked horror of a city. This event would come to be known as Stockholm's Bloodbath, and would also come to change Swedish history forever. But why was this event so important? We'll examine this in more detail in the latest episode of A Vandring genom svensk historia. The tragedy of that day in Stockholm actually began with events that happened almost 100 years earlier. In 1397, the Queen of Denmark, Margaret I, and the heads of the other Nordic countries, Norway and Sweden, met at a cathedral in Kalmar, Sweden. This event would come to be known as the Kalmar Recess. Since Denmark had the biggest population, economy, along with its proximity to Europe, it was agreed to be the natural choice to lead the Union. Queen Margaret would place her ward, Eric of Pomerania, as regent. This made Denmark the only nation to rule over all 4 Nordic countries at one time in Scandinavian history. At the time, the Hanseatic League controlled the shipping on the lucrative trade routes along the Baltic Sea between London, England in the west, and Novgorod, Russia in the east. They were a confederation of merchant guilds and towns that operated several key shipping centers along the trade route. They collected tolls from boats ferrying goods back and forth, and in the process became very wealthy and very powerful. This sent shockwaves to the Hanseatic League. The Nordic Union would make Denmark a European superpower and a direct threat to their monopoly. They couldn't allow this to happen. Their response was swift. They declared war on Denmark and set up a naval blockade around Scandinavia to block the import and export of goods. Unable to sell their raw materials or buy much-needed goods and supplies, the Swedes suffered economically. To make matters worse, Eric had also increased taxes to pay for the war, and whose collection was administered by hand-picked and corrupt sheriffs. The Swedish peasants were pushed to the breaking point. A rebellion broke out in 1494 in the mining region of Dalarna in the north. A charismatic Swedish mine owner and nobleman named Engelbrekt Engelbrektsson led a peasant revolt against a local corrupt tax collector that ended with his removal. The revolt quickly spread through all of Sweden. The Swedish nobles quickly joined and later took up the revolt, becoming a permanent Swedish political faction. Eric quelled the conflict by appeasing the rebel leaders' demands. But Swedish support for the Union was greatly weakened. Sweden was split into 2 factions: the anti-Unionists who were for independence, and the Unionists who supported membership in the Union. The leadership of the 2 sides became a kind of family feud. The anti-Unionists were led by the Sturers and their followers, and the Unionists were led by the powerful clergy family, the Trolles. Over the years, a series of battles were fought in Sweden to bring the Swedes back in the Union by force. The Swedes, under the Sture leadership, remained victorious, and Sweden remained out of the Union. In May 1519, with the approval of the Swedish Council, Sture forces attacked Trolle at his council Stäket. The anti-Unionist forces destroyed the castle and jailed the Unionist leader, in a move denounced by the Catholic Church in Rome as an act of heresy. Christian's main man in Sweden was jailed. The frustrated Danish king had tried twice to invade the Swedes and free Trolle, only to retreat in defeat. The anti-Unionists were growing more and more emboldened about their independence, but the king was not ready to give up on his family's dream of a Danish superpower. The time had come to bring the Swedes to their knees. To pull this off was going to be expensive. Christian raised an army of mercenaries, and to pay for them he sought the help of the most powerful man in Europe, his father-in-law and Holy Roman Emperor, Ferdinand II. With his army in place, he invaded southern Sweden in November 1520. The two armies met on the field in Östergötland. Early in the conflict, Sture was hit by cannon shot. Mortally wounded, he died along the way, only 28 years old. With their leader dead, the Swedish resistance broke and were routed. King Christian made his way north, plundering and burning along the way. Most of the provinces was eventually to take the capital city of Stockholm and crown himself king. Stockholm refused to recognize the king. Sten Sture left his 29-year-old widow, Kristin Gyllenstierna, to defend the capital. Kristina prepared Stockholm with enough food and provisions to survive a long siege. The prospect of a protracted winter siege was out of the question for the king. Money and food necessary to keep his mercenaries together started running out. Christian needed Stockholm to fall quickly, and he had no choice but to parley with Kristina. Kristina's terms were going to be expensive. Total amnesty for her and the rebels, freedom for all the soldiers taken prisoner, and no reciprocations for royalists that had suffered during the war. It was a personal triumph for Kristina as well. She received castles and estates in Sweden and Finland as part of the deal. Reluctantly, the king accepted the deal. The civil war, however, was finally over and there was relief throughout the country. Sweden would be ruled according to Swedish laws, and in turn they would recognize Christian II as their king. The royal house of Denmark would take its place among the great houses in Europe. Which brings us to the beginning of our story.